So I just want to say a few words and share a few memories of some of the ways Menachem has inspired me and inspired us all. We're all here today to honor him, and it's bittersweet that you're going to be aren't going to be our rabbi here anymore. You could be our rabbi there. That'll be good too. But hearing Professor Dollinger's talk and Rabbi Wolf Roussan's talk, it just does. You see the ways that Menachem, that you have brought prophecy and the call to action to our shul in all kinds of ways, and at the same time as being like a prophet has to be annoying sometimes, and you have to do that, And I'll mention, this is kind of, I guess, dangerous to say in one way that you've been annoying, but I'm going to go ahead anyway and just mention, I know that there are certain people in the shul, like you always make a point of praying for peace in the Middle East in a very emotional, dramatic, moving way. And I know that some people in the shul, some people who are very close to me, find it difficult to hear that every week, and they say, I can't believe again he's like talking about how we buried our fathers, and you persist in saying, you know what, it makes you uncomfortable. It should make you uncomfortable, and I really thank you for making us uncomfortable, So, I could list that you co-founded Rabbis Against Gun Violence and brought 1,600 rabbis together to work on such an important issue with lives being lost all the time from inaction. I could mention the One America movement, that you're bringing people together from different faiths to work together, to serve the community and collaborate and build understanding. I can mention that you stand and get arrested, for the rights of immigrants at Trump Tower. But I want to share another memory too, which is, you always talk about how we should look outside the windows of our shul. We should see how beautiful the world is, and we should also feel called to care for that world. And so one of the things I really value that I remember is the way you brought us together with the church across the street. And I think there's a lot more to do. We need to build that relationship. We need to strengthen our relationship with the way. But you have done so much to connect us and to start that relationship. And I remember particularly a day, it was a few years ago now, when the Black Lives Matter movement was really building, and there had been, quite a few incidents of police violence and people being killed. And I just remember the families and the kids from Netivot and the Way on University Ave lying down the die-in that happened that day, and how beautiful and moving it was to see people, putting their bodies there. And it reminds me, I just want to share something that you shared with us, just a quote that I think is so telling, where you said, this is what prayer looks like, putting your body where your words are. So I thank you so much for all that you've given us and the message you've carried to us, and I look forward to hearing from your teaching today too.
So hi everyone. I want to first just thank Joel and the Adult Ed Committee and the shul as a whole for honoring me in this way. It's a very powerful thing. Do you want to party when you're transitioning from a pulpit? And the answer is no. I want to know that something I taught landed and mattered enough to motivate us to do good in the world. And so I really appreciate this very, very much. And to Peretz and to Mark, what an honor to be your students. We all get to be that. I get to be that. So thank you for being here. It's a deepening of what we stand for. I had a whole series of things planned to say, and I think I'm not going to do what I planned. What I'd like to do instead is just think out loud and maybe reference some of the things that I prepared, but more than that, look out the windows. There's a teaching that you might know that I've shared before, which is Jews are not supposed to pray in a room that doesn't have a window. And that's coupled with the teaching that you're not supposed to pray facing a mirror. And I remember I had this moment sitting next to my teacher Danny Landis in Jerusalem, and we were at the precursor to Shir Chadashah, the modern Orthodox minyan that Tova Hartman founded. This minyan was meeting at the Shalom Hartman Institute before Shir Chadashah found a new home, and it was beautiful, and it was night, and the windows were in front of us, but it's dark outside, and you might know the physics of how reflections work. When it's dark outside and it's light inside, and we're looking out the windows, but the windows turned into mirrors. And I looked at Danny and I said, Danny, we can't daven here. He said, you're so frum. And then he said, and this is what I'd like to share most of all, as long as you're not fixated on yourself and you actually look through that window, you can daven here. So that's actually what I'd like to say in the beginning and the end of my remarks. Please know yourself. Please do the self-reflective work of continuing to grow as individual people and as a community. But don't get so self-absorbed. That is a very Berkeley thing to do. As Heschel would say, we have no shortage of goodwill. We need some good thinking. And Netivot Shalom is such a gathering of minds and hearts, young and old, and different kinds of people coming together. Not different enough to claim diversity as our hallmark. We say that, but we are not that yet. We're not that politically, we're not that racially, we're not that in all sorts of ways. The diversity that we would claim, which would reflect a real diversity, would be a violation of the Berkeley norm, which is, when I first moved here, people would say, what's the big difference between the East Coast and the West Coast? I said, first of all, I live in Berkeley, I don't know the West Coast. I don't know California, I barely know Berkeley. But when I was moving here, I had this mythic notion of what Berkeley was, which was we don't like rules. And what I learned once I landed here is, no, we just don't like your rules. Well, that's true at Netivot Shalom too. That is true in a really serious way, and I don't mind being this kind of a norm. It is among the highest compliments once I got comfortable in my own skin. And I'm working on that too. And I thank you for my practice. But what I will say is this, we have such privilege that we don't name. I'm so honored that you're here, but we had the luxury of showing up. Let's take time to learn. Let's take time to mark a transition that is lovingly and gently done. What privilege. Look at the seats you're sitting in. We have a seating capacity in this room of 345, but we can never have 345 people in this room because we chose nicer seats. Look at the beautiful minimalist in terms of the art and the architecture of this gorgeous sanctuary. But the reason why there isn't art on the walls, you might not know historically, is that we had hoped to have art, but we couldn't all agree on what art it would be. So now we have the glory of having to imagine what that art would be, except doesn't that say something about our internal process? So, what I was planning on talking about was reflecting on a really, really well-known, unless you don't know about it, essay by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who is many, many things. He's a modern Orthodox rabbi. He is a deep, deep thinker. He has stood in contradistinction to the rightward lurch of much of Orthodoxy and sees denominations as delivery systems for a God who loves all people. And for that, he's pilloried by fundamentalists, and that makes him a good teacher. So he has an essay called The Ethics of Jewish Power, and I didn't include the full title, and we'll see how much of it I actually share now, but among the things that I wonder about when I leave will be how this question gets answered. The ethics of Jewish power, the state of Israel. Not to say that we should be only Israel-focused in our Jewish identity conversations, but it is so detrimental to a Jewish identity to be avoidant of Israel in our Jewish conversations. Where does Israel play a part in our pride, not our critique? We are really good at critique because we show up as critics. We live in Berkeley. So we'll show up because it's fashionable to be an activist. I'll show up for March. I'm not sure what we're marching for, but give me a sign. And that's not to say that we don't have principles. It's to say we are quick to be active in reaction, but that actually falls out of sync with any historical consciousness. As Mark was speaking, it's not only fascinating to see that these quotes that feel very contemporaneous or very external are actually old and very familiar. I'm the one who's sounding so poor. When it comes to the question of Israel and Jewish identity, and just to address the topic I might actually say something about now, which is power, I asked just a few months ago, the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, I asked the community, for those of you who were alive, because I wasn't, what did that day feel like? What did it feel like to win? What does winning mean in war? That's a different question, but what did it feel like to not lose? Maybe is the right way to ask a Jew. What did it feel like to not lose? And one person's answer stuck with me. It was Marilyn. Marilyn, in tears, came up to me and said, I haven't thought about that in a very long time. But I, in that moment, said, oh God, you do love us. You do care. A modern Jewish perspective rarely has that kind of historic base. And Netivot Shalom is an example of a very modern community, dedicated to the universal values of Judaism, but where is the pride that is tribal? Not the self-assurance, smug, superiority, chosenness, none of those ugly things. But we wield enormous power now, which gives us the luxurious position of not being grateful that we're okay. And are we really? So there are a few quotes from this essay by Yitz Greenberg that I'd like to share. And they don't, I'm looking at Lisa. My Rabbi Lisa, when she spoke at another event that we had recently, she reminded me that I often say, we're not going to tie this up in a bow. So we're not going to tie this up in a bow. Here are some quotes when it comes to the question of power. Power corrupts, but there is no other morally tolerable choice. The alternative is death. This is the lesson that the Jewish people learned from the Holocaust. So just for a second, not because it's any fun to say or think about or acknowledge, or even confront if you wanted to disagree. I happen to not disagree, I just don't like that I agree. Are you willing to acknowledge your power? What was our big crisis, our existential crisis at Netivot Shalom over my tenure? We almost lost the building. And that is serious. But we would have been fine. You would have been okay. You could have joined another shul. We would have been very sad. Our dreams wouldn't have made it, but we would have been okay. You wouldn't have been homeless. Privilege. We would have lost our building, but we would have been okay. The bank was cruel. It's not the Nazis. The Bible recounts, this is Yitz again, that when Israel's ancestral father paused in his flight and turned to defend himself against the oncoming armies of Esau, remember, dysfunctional family, the entire book of Genesis, and all of us. Here's the quote, Jacob feared and was greatly distressed. It's a kefal lashon, a doubling of language, which the rabbis never like. So the Torah says these two things. The rabbis then say, all right, when it says Jacob feared, he feared that he might be killed. And he was greatly distressed. He was greatly distressed that he might kill others. The costs of power are always both human and moral. So we could talk about it in such stark terms. We could, and in fact we should. Because in a vulnerable American context where we could, and I don't know if the right word should be do in this sentence for this community. So I'll just say it as a suggestion. Where we could make a difference in the elections, where we could make a difference by dying in the streets, where we could make a difference by not just celebrating an iftar once a year with our Turkish Muslim community, as we'll do tonight, but making sure that the rest of the Jewish world knows that the Muslim call to prayer can safely happen in a Jewish space with an Israeli flag right there. That it is possible to have a robust, proud Jewish identity that takes seriously responsibility with affection for and defense of Israel, and to have a wide open heart, willing to be vulnerable in public, to know that we will not agree about everything, but we'll stand together. And Joel, I appreciate you bringing up the movement for One America, the One America movement. I'm one of the founders of, and we as a community hosted the Bay Area launch for. It isn't to bring people of different faiths together, it's to bring people who disagree together. We are really good at pointing out the parts of the golden rule that each one of our faiths have, but the question is, I actually don't believe in the same things that the Second Amendment fanatics do. So the One America movement is going to have me and the vice president of the Cato Institute do a public debate, trying to find a place where we can agree about somebody not dying because of a gun. The real question is, can you do that as a shul? And I have to say you now. After 11 years, it's you and it's me, and it'll always be an us, but your turn to figure out what actions you want to take, because Heschel said, you are called not to take a leap of faith. That is a distinctly Christian way of saying it. You're called to take a leap of action. But the way to do that is the other part of Heschel. I love parts that you said, we have the quotes, but you have to read the whole essay. Right? So the most oft-quoted thing from Heschel is, at the March Selma, right, the journalist said, why weren't you at shul? And the famous answer is, I felt my legs were praying. But the reason why the question made sense is because he went to shul all the time. He went to shul, and that's what taught him to march. He went to shul, and that's the place he learned to look out into the world and to stand with people who were black. Because to say it's their problem and not mine is to forget the Mishnah, which tells me that they are created in the image of God, and if I think they're not, I'm just saying I'm not. So much to say. When I first got here, there was a Sunday series I taught called Living a Mythic Life. One day it might turn into a book, maybe. It was a good class. I had the notes. I have no idea what I taught. But the topics remained with me, and one of them was the idea of mythic time. And I remember having this conversation, Joan, it might have been with you, about smell and how it invokes memories more powerfully, so quickly. So I smell the smell, and suddenly I'm in that time. I smell an Afghan, and suddenly my mom is crocheting my Cookie Monster thing. I still have it. But isn't it powerful to say, oh, I look at you, Joel, and you hosted me for my first Shabbat. And to know that I'm actually at your table right now. So even when we take leave-taking, that time will become, as Doctor Who puts it, timey-wimey. But the reason why I think that's essential to say is not only my nostalgia that I've been feeling now for about 1.5 years, knowing this day was coming, but is also an acknowledgement that the prophets were not speaking to their time, they're speaking to our time. Prophets did not, as someone said just before, did not want their job. And nobody listened. Nobody listened. I quote this often. Mark Angel quotes Gershom Shalom as saying that the definition of a mystic is someone who has an intimation of the world as it ought to be, is in deep distress and pain because the world is far from where it ought to be, dedicates their life towards building this world into that world just a little bit, knowing it won't happen. The analogous, very modern quote is from my prophet, Ruth Messenger, who says the reason why relief work is so heroic is because we don't think it stands a chance at meeting the need, and we get started. So here's what I want to ask you, just for a second. What is a part of the world that you know is broken and you wish you didn't have to hear about? It could be the 90 Americans killed every day, not in mass school shootings, but in urban gun violence, because the NRA has become a profit magnet, not a protector of the Constitution. So you don't want to hear about it, I don't want to hear about it, but last night there was a gunfight on San Pablo and Ashby that you didn't hear about, because even if you opened up Berkeley side, you didn't want to see the headline, and it's easy, Twitter. But the other question is this: were you quick to condemn Israel for the deaths of the Palestinian rioters at the Gaza wall without wondering what would you do if you were trying to protect your family in Israel only a few years after the tunnels that were going to infiltrate under our kibbutzim were going to massacre us? So the question of social justice and Jewish power and the ethics of it, you basically have to decide that you are supposed to have a voice in the world and then actually have it. So I'm just asking you to do this. Joel, I'm sure, because he's a really good person, is going to lead us to think about things we can and should and therefore must do. Because if you can, it's not a choice anymore. If you can make a difference, then it's an obligation. It's really sweet that we sing the song, Olam Chesed. I'm really glad we know the melody. You know, I actually never lead it myself. But the English words that I offered were not, you can build this world from love. It's, you must build this world from love. So I'm just asking you, do you think so? Do you think so? And then if you do think so, I'm just going to be really pointed about this, and it's recorded for posterity, so let's see what kind of blowback I get from my people for marching where I think I'm supposed to march, which I have gotten through the 11 years, as anyone would. As anyone would. But getting arrested is a better story to tell afterwards than it was for the rabbi coming home defending himself for doing what he thought was the Jewish thing. And that's not to say this is a unique community and that was a unique action. It's what happens. We are supposed to annoy each other. It's supposed to happen. So here's what I want to ask you. If you think you must do something because Judaism calls you to be involved in the world, not just a good davener, but a good leg davener because you learned to daven, are you going to take a look at the shul's budget before it gets passed in the next month? And ask, all right, how does this demonstrate our priorities as we position ourselves in the world? I'm not telling you what they should be. In fact, I am, actually. But it's not mine, it's yours. What should the orientation of Netivot Shalom be as you take your next step as a community together? Is it a world that you must build from love? Or is that a nice song? And I'm glad you think it's a nice song. But it's not a song at all. I was weeping singing it in the recording studio because all I could see were the falling towers that prompted the song being written. I wrote it for my daughter after 9/11 because I'm scared about the world and want it to be better for her. So I'm going to ask you to take really seriously this question. I'm not going to try to end it with any poetic flourish. I will end it with an incredible sense of gratitude to this home that I've had. But do you think you have an obligation in the world as a Jew? Do you? And I hope you do.